Okay, so we're going to talk about security zones. So we'll get into what these zones are and how they work. So a little bit the zone, the purpose of a zone. We'll look at types of zones, how we use them, get into configuring zones, and then we'll look at monitoring zones. So the zone, what we're going to discover really is the zone is the basic building block of our security policy. So we have some different types of zones. Some zones are actually not used for security at all. And we'll just cover off on those before we kind of move ahead into the ones that we are going to use for security. So there is a thing called a null zone. And kind of a null zone is really not really a zone at all. So this is a very important point that I want you to get. They're in the null zone. And here's a really important point about that. All traffic is dropped. So if an interface is in the null zone, no traffic can go in or out of that interface. Okay, all traffic is dropped. So if I'm configuring a device, and I go ahead and I create a new logical interface, for example, say it might be a new VPN interface, it might be interface into the zone that I want it to be. Otherwise, no traffic is going through that interface. Now, you actually experienced that last term when some of you found that when you put the device into factory default, suddenly you couldn't get any traffic in or out of your device. And that was because probably your interfaces ended up in the null zone, okay, rather than in that specific zone. Or what happened was you somehow or another got your device into flow-based processing rather than packet-based processing. As soon as you're in flow-based processing, security zones are required, security zones apply, okay, and all interfaces are by default in the null zone. And all traffic is dropped. So interfaces can only pass and accept traffic, or can pass and accept traffic only if assigned to a non-null zone. Now, the only exception to that are some of the higher end devices have this FXP0 interface, which, or maybe you connect to it with use the JWeb device. But essentially, its only purpose in life is for device configuration. That's it. Is managing the device. Okay, just a bit of a review of what we just looked at here. So our packet comes in to our ingress interface. We have the matching. We go through our screen options, routing, and then we arrive at the zones. Okay, so we do a zone evaluation here. Now, if the packet doesn't go any further, so there is a strict hierarchical linkage between zones and interfaces, and that is you can assign a logical interface to a routing instance, as you know, but only one. You can't assign a logical interface to multiple routing instances, but all zone logical interfaces must belong to the same routing instance. Okay, so if I have a routing instance that I'm using, then all the interfaces in that instance have to be in the same zone. So all zone logical interfaces must belong to the same routing instance. Okay, so let's look at this relationship between interfaces, zones, and routing instances. Here we have our interfaces, represented on these little blue rectangles here. We've got forwarding tables. which represent our zones, so zone A, B, C, and D. We have multiple zones, and these are routing instances. So we can have multiple zones inside of a routing instance. That is fine. But we can't have interfaces from routing instance 1 and routing instance 2, for example, in zone 3. Okay, so all the interfaces in zone C would have to be from routing instance 2. Same goes for zone D, all have to be from the same routing instance. So we can't share interfaces between routing instances and put them into the same zone. We can have multiple zones within a routing instance. So we could have traffic within a routing instance entering on one zone, exiting on another zone, and evaluating security policies between the zones for that traffic that is transiting that routing instance. That's fine. No problem with that. Okay, got that. All right, so you can't do anything with that if you can't configure that. There are some user-defined zones which can be configured. The ones we're really going to be using are the security zones. They're the ones we're interested in. They're the ones that we're going to be using for our policies. There is another type of zone called a functional zone. The only name that we can give to this, and in reality the only interface that we're really going to be putting into a functional zone called management, is the loopback interface. So really the functional zone exists so that you can put a loopback interface in it, and the reason we may want to have our loopback interface in it is because we may use that for routing protocols like OSPF, BGP, so routing instances. So basically OSPF traffic will have the loopback interface as the routing ID. BGP peering we set up between loopback interfaces as well. So we want to have that so that we're not constrained by security policies for those types of routing protocols. So that's really the only reason that it's the only purpose really for that functional zone. Set up a zone called management into which we put our loopback interface. That's basically it. That's all you're used for most of the time. Probably all you're used for. Then we have our security zones. These are the ones that we are interested in. Collection of one or more network segments requiring the regulation of inbound and outbound traffic through the use of policies. So we can have more than one network segment in a zone. We can have multiple network segments in the same zone. That's fine. Use of filter traffic destined for the device itself. So traffic that's entering the device. There are some things we're going to look at. We can set up some things that we allow in, what we allow in, or what we don't allow in, to be specified in the zone itself. So that's traffic destined for the device itself. Use of filter transit traffic, which is kind of what we're doing most of the time. Intrazone and interzone transit traffic. Flow requires security policies. There are no security zones defined by default, and we cannot share zones. Earlier, we cannot share zones between routing instances. Okay, so we have looked at this functional zone. I'll just cover on this very briefly. You can only create one functional zone. Its name is management, and the only thing we're really ever going to do with it is put a loopback interface in it. That's basically it. That's all we need to say about that. The system-defined zone, there is this thing called a null zone, which is the default, unconfigurable. Every interface belongs to it by default. If you delete an interface from a zone, it goes back into the null zone. Or you remove an interface from the zone, it goes into the null zone. And the operating system rejects all traffic to and from interfaces belonging to the null zone. That's a really important point. So, like for example, you go ahead and you want to create a new network segment, so you go ahead and create a new logical interface with an IP address on it. You can figure it all out, and you're thinking, how come I can't get any connectivity to this particular interface? Oh yes, I forgot to put it into a proper security zone. So you have to go into a security zone and add that interface into a zone. So just something to be aware of. System-defined zones. There is this thing called a GNOS host zone, which, to be honest with you, I have never used, but you could use it as a way of controlling the traffic that is allowed into the device itself. So in other words, traffic that's destined for the device. So really it's management traffic. Traffic that's destined for the device. And that's really all that the host zone is used for. I don't want to spend too much time on this host zone, but basically it just gives you more control over what traffic is allowed into the device itself. Factory default zones. Now, remember when we did our very first one of our early labs, you probably went in and you did a load factory default configuration. Remember that? And if you didn't really read the lab all that well, you probably committed that configuration as well. Okay? And what you would have discovered after you committed that, you ended up with two zones, one called untrust and one called trust. And in the trust zone, we ended up with VLAN 0, and then we ended up with GE001 in the untrust zone. I think that's where it puts that by default. That's the factory default configuration. So when you buy a brand new Juniper SRX, pull it out of the box, that's what you're going to get. Of course, you can change all that around totally, and you probably will. So that's our factory default. So let's look at configuring zones. So to find a security or functional zone, we're probably going to be, as I said, there's only one functional zone, it's called management, and you're going to put a loopback interface in it, that's it. What you're really going to be doing is defining security zones. You're then going to add logical interfaces to those zones. You will then add the services and protocols that need permission to come into the device or come in through interfaces to the device itself. So the interfaces that belong to that zone, so you need to add that in. If you omit this step, then the device will not prevent any traffic destined for itself. So that's pretty important. If you intend to use an interface in that zone for SSH traffic or say to the device, or set up a HTTP session, manage the device, you need to allow that. Okay, configuration steps, we go in configuration mode, we're going into edit security zones, and then we set up a security zone and we give it a name. Yes, you can create a functional zone. It's going to be called management. That's the only name you're allowed to give it. But what you're most likely going to be doing is going into the edit security zones hierarchy, or set security zones, and then create a security zone from there. We also will then want to add some interfaces into that zone. And then we want to go and specify what traffic, what host inbound traffic we're going to allow into the zone itself. Okay, so we can say we are going to allow SSH traffic, we're going to not allow telnet traffic, and we're going to allow pings into that interface. So we can define all of that within the zone itself. So the interfaces will belong to a zone, and then we define in the zone what traffic we are going to allow in through those interfaces into that zone. So the host inbound traffic statement we have got the system services hierarchy specifies allowed services into the zone or into the device through interfaces belonging to the zone. So we can say Telnet, SSH, DNS, ping, for example, SMTP. There's some examples. We could say that we are going to allow all, the all option basically just says everything's allowed in. And the any service option allows services, allows all services and open all ports. The protocols then says what routing protocols we're going to be allowing into the zone. We can say all as well. We can also say all and then have exceptions. Say yep, everything except this. It's an example. Set security zones. The zone name is HR. Using the host inbound traffic statement right here, and we're saying system services all. So we're allowing all system services in. So this is configured under the edit security zones hierarchy. We can also configure a statement under a specific interface. So we can allow some traffic on one interface and different traffic on another interface within the same zone. So we can get down to kind of a more granular level and actually start configuring that on the interface itself. The interface level configuration, being more specific, will override the zone level configuration. So if I said, well, I'm going to allow all at the zone level, but on the interface, I said I'm just going to allow HTTP, then on that particular interface, you'll only be allowed to, or that interface will then only allow HTTP. So let's look at this configuration here. We're under edit security zones. The zone is called HR, but the host inbound traffic hierarchy, there we're saying system services, Telnet and FTP, and there's our interfaces, which are configured on our zone. So interface GE000 and GE001. Okay, so just look at that configuration there. What protocols are going to be allowed in on those two interfaces? Host inbound traffic, Telnet, FTP. So there's my zone, it's called HR. It's got two interfaces in the zone, and I'm allowing certain traffic into the zone. Now you have to do this. You have to say what traffic you are allowing into the zone. No, it's not allowed. Okay, so because we've got this configured at the zone hierarchy, and the interfaces are part of the zone, then both Telnet and FTP is allowed on both of those interfaces. Okay, because they are in the zone, and that is configured at the zone level, and also there is nothing specifically configured on the interfaces themselves. Look at this scenario though, where we've got the same configured at the zone level, Telnet and FTP, but on GE001 we've got SNMP configured. So what is allowed on GE000 and what is allowed on GE001? What do you think is allowed on 000? Yep, Telnet and FTP. What's allowed on 001? Is it Telnet, FTP and SNMP, or is it just SNMP? In actual fact, it's just SNMP. Okay, because the more specific configuration overrides the less specific configuration. Right, so if you actually did want Telnet and FTP and SNMP on interface GE001, you have to actually put that down at the interface level. Okay, because this level overrides the less, so the more specific overrides the less, so not adds to, overrides, okay, the less specific. Okay, let's look at this one here. What services can enter the device through interfaces GE000 and GE001? So here we've got a zone level configuration, system services all, and we've got telnet except, so everything except telnet, basically. Now we've got some specific configurations down here, and we've got on interface 001 everything except HTTP and FTP. Okay, so in those configurations, what can come in through GE000? Looking at that configuration there. And the answer is everything except telnet. And on 001 is everything except HTTP and FTP. Okay, so could I telnet into GE001? Yes, I could, exactly, because I'm allowing it. Because this, more specific, overrides the less specific at the higher level. Yeah. Okay, so that's very important to be aware of that. Okay, let's look at monitoring security zones. So if we go and do a show security zones as an operational command, we're going to see the zones that we have got configured right there. We're going to be able to look at the names of the zones. We're going to look at if we can configure policies on that zone. We're going to look at the interfaces on those zones. This particular zone is a functional zone and it has one interface in it. The other is a security zone called HR. It also has one interface in it. So if we do if you're looking at the interface and we do a show interfaces extensive command, we'll actually get the zone information on the interface itself coming up. So this particular interface is in a security zone called trust. So you can see that the output of that command. We'll also see what's allowed. So this is allowed host inbound traffic. So this is the protocols that are allowed in on that. And the bytes that are permitted by, and they have been permitted by a particular policy on there as well. And we've got some flow stats that are also output from that command. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a little demonstration of a device with zones that are set up. So we'll just take a look at that shortly. But in this chapter, we described zones and their purpose. We looked at types of zones, looked at the application of zones, looked at how do we configure zones, and how do we monitor zones. Let's look at some review questions here. So first of all, what is the purpose of a zone? What is the purpose of a zone? What goes into a zone? So what goes into a zone is we would put the network segments that have the same security requirements. So this is an important thing when you're designing your security structure. It's important to ask yourself the question, what are the specific security requirements of my different network segments? So if I've got a network segment, what traffic do I want to allow into that network? So I'm saying, well, I'm going to, that particular network segment, so really what we're going to allow in from the outside. Well, that network segment may have a unified communication server in it. So I'm going to allow SIP traffic into that network segment. I'm going to allow RTP traffic into that network segment. And that may be all that I want to allow in from the outside world. That may be the only thing that I'm going to allow a connection initiated from outside into that zone. I'm going to allow traffic that initiates from within the zone to go out. So all traffic that's initiated from within the zone, sure, I'm going to allow that traffic out. That's fine. I may allow that back out into the outside world. I may not allow any traffic that's initiated from within that zone into some other zones, maybe within my organisation. I want to kind of protect that. Okay, so I've got a work server sitting in that particular network segment. But in another network segment, I've got a web server. So are my security requirements different to the unified communication server to my web server? Yes, I'm not really interested in allowing ACIT traffic into my web server, but I do need to allow HTTP traffic, HTTPS traffic, perhaps, and maybe FTP traffic, maybe into that web server. Okay, so I've got a different security requirement to the network segment that's got my unified comms server on it, to the network segment that's got my web server on it. So it would make sense that I need to put those two network segments in different zones. Okay. What about a network segment that's just got my internal users on it, my networks, my file servers, and those sorts of things? What am I going to allow into that particular network segment from the outside world? Well, I might say I'm going to allow absolutely nothing. There's nothing that's going to come in from the outside world into that particular zone. I'm allowing nothing whatsoever into there. Well, I might have 3 or 4 different networks that have exactly that same security requirement. Nothing gets in. Well, they can all go in the same zone because they have the same security requirement. So when you're thinking about zones, it's a case of what is the security requirement for that network segment? If that network segment has the same security requirement as other network segments, they can all belong to the same zone. But if there is a different requirement, then I should really be thinking about putting those in different zones so that I can specifically control the security of that particular network segment, because that has different requirements to another network segment when you're setting up a policy for a zone. Okay, so that is the purpose of a zone. What zone types exist in a GNOS device? Types, well, security zone, that was one type. Looked at a thing called a functional zone, a system defined zone, which is a null zone. Question, what happens if an interface is in a null zone? What is the effect on that interface? Anybody? What happens if you go ahead and create a brand new interface? You create a brand new logical interface. What zone is that interface going to be in? It will be in the null zone. Yeah. What is the effect of that interface being in the null zone?
Drop all packets.
No, that's right. You cannot forward packets, you cannot receive traffic, you cannot send traffic. Yeah. So once you go ahead and create an interface, you then have to go ahead and put it into the appropriate zone. The example of that is if you're, we'll notice that when we go and set up a VPN, we're setting up an interface-based VPN, sorry, a route-based VPN. We'll use an interface for that, which is a specific logical interface used for VPNs. You've got to go and put that into an appropriate zone. Similarly, if you're setting up your device to connect to the internet via PPPoE, okay, that is a logical interface that you will create to establish that connection. You've got to put that interface into the appropriate zone so that it can connect to the outside world. You'll actually go and put it in the internet zone or the untrust zone, depending on what you name it. It'll be the zone that has connectivity to the outside world. It will be out there. That interface will be out there in the untrusted sort of world of the internet. Okay, so traffic that arrives on that interface will be in that zone, and then you want to have policies that say what can come from there into the rest of my network. Okay, so you put your interfaces in the appropriate zone. Okay, what steps are necessary to configure a zone? So we're going to go under the it's the edit security zones hierarchy, and we'll give it we'll then specify what type of zone it is. It's a security zone, and then we'll give it a name. How do we specify the types of traffic that are allowed into the device? The command is host inbound traffic, and that's the command. Alright, so what I want to do, just before we go to lunch, I just want to give you an example of some zones. So I'm just going to punch out there, and I'm going to open up PuTTY. That. Here we are. And I'm going to connect up to a firewall, and I'll log in as me. Okay, so here's a running firewall. Let's take a look at the zones. Show security zones. So we've got a few zones going on here. I've got an admin zone. Yes, it's a security zone. I can configure policies for that. Interfaces, we've got one. It's VLAN 100 sitting in the admin zone. So just one interface sitting in that zone. We have another zone. It's called the classroom zone. It's got interface VLAN 40 in there, in that zone. We have another zone called the pulse zone. I've got a couple of VLANs in that zone. VLAN 101, VLAN 102. Let's go down and look at some more. There's a zone called trust, which has got VLAN 0 in it. And there's a zone called untrust. It's got a few in there. It's got FE007, we've got PP0 and ST0. So FE007, that's a physical interface, right? That's the physical interface that connects me to my internet connection. Okay. Then we've got PP0.0. That is a logical interface that facilitates the PPPoE protocol. So that interface is actually providing the PPPoE connectivity that is coming in on FE007. So that interface is also sitting there in the untrust zone, which connects me to the internet. Then there's this other interface, which is ST0. That is actually a VPN interface. So the VPN will terminate on that interface, but because that VPN goes from my device out through the internet, that is also sitting out there in the untrust zone. So I would have to have policies then that determine what is allowed from that zone back into either my admin zone, my classroom zones, my trust and my pulse zone or my trust zone. So there'll be policies then that determine what is allowed between those zones. There is a Junos host zone, and we've got nothing in that zone, not even used at all. Okay, that is a Junos host zone. That's a default or system defined zone. It's there by default. Okay, so that's just looking at zones. Let's take a look at let's just go into one of these zones. We'll see what traffic we're allowing into those zones. Let's go into our admin zone. So I'm just going to go into configuration mode. Let's go to edit security zones. Oops. Security zone admin. ADMIN. It is. So let's do a show on that, and we'll see what we've got configured. Well, there's a few things going on here. We've got some address pools configured. We'll get into what they are later. But what I want to talk about right now is this host inbound traffic. So system services all, protocols all, and there's my interface configured in my zone. So we've got basically, we're allowing everything into this admin zone. that's one of our internal zones. So we're not really too fussed about what we're allowing into that particular zone. Let's take a look at, let's go up a level and let's just go edit security zone classroom. And we'll look at that one. So we have got lots of addresses in there. Host inbound traffic, we're allowing all. And interfaces, look at that. We've actually said on this interface where we are allowing DHCP and ping. Okay, so effectively, what I'm really allowing into this zone is DHCP and ping. I've only got one interface, and this configuration overrides this configuration. Okay, so really what I'm really effectively allowing in is DHCP and ping into that zone, and that's it. Okay, so you can't establish an SSH connection to the device on VLAN 40 or any other connection really to the device on VLAN 40. Okay, let's go up and take a look at our untrust zone. Security zones, untrust. So, oh, there we are, lots of address books there, some familiar name popping up. We've got some screen options configured on there as well. We've got some interfaces. What about traffic? What are we allowing in? Address book. Host inbound traffic is what we're allowing in. We're allowing IKE because we've got a VPN set up. So we need to allow IKE traffic in to our zone, so our VPN will work, and we're allowing HTTPS in as well. And that's it. That's all we're allowing in. And we've got, as we already discovered, a bunch of interfaces configured in that zone. We'll get into these address books later. They have to do with when we're setting up our security policies. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail. So that's that zone. What other zones did we have? They're basically the ones that we're really using. If I go to edit security zone, the other one, trust. Show. So we are allowing everything in. We've got VLAN 0. In actual fact, VLAN 0 is connected to absolutely nothing. So it really makes no difference that we're allowing everything in because nothing is connected to VLAN 0. The trust zone, in actual fact, this is sort of like a leftover, if you like, from the factory default. I could probably go ahead and delete the trust zone altogether and it wouldn't make any difference to anything because we're not actually using it for anything. We'll have to do a run show interfaces first and we'll see what our interfaces are doing. You'll see that VLAN 0 is actually down and connected and not actually even passing traffic at all. So the ones that we are using though is 40, 100, 101, 102, and you may have noticed that they were all associated to security zones. You also would have noted that my VPN interface, which is currently down for some reason, is associated with a zone. My PPP0 or my PP0 is associated with a zone. It is up. That's my internet connection right there. My loopback interface was not associated with the zone at all. So my loopback interface will be sitting actually in the null zone right now. So I don't even, and I'm not using that for anything in actual fact. So that's just sitting there. And we had FE007 was sitting in a zone as well. Okay. Now, here's a question. These interfaces here are all up, but why aren't they sitting? Why weren't they in any zones? They're all up, but you didn't notice them in a zone anywhere. Why is that? Can anybody tell me? Okay, here's the point. A zone will contain a logical interface. A logical interface. If you look at these interfaces here, they are all set at Ethernet switches. They are all layer 2 interfaces. Okay, so these layer 2 interfaces are simply processing traffic at layer 2. They don't need to be in a zone, because they actually are, the traffic that's coming in on those interfaces is all associated with a VLAN. So it's either VLAN 40, VLAN 100, or these other VLANs. Okay, so these are the logical interfaces that are in the zones. In actual fact, I'm only using those 3. Okay, they are the ones that are in the zones. Okay, so when we have Ethernet switching, we don't need to put that in the zone. Does that make sense? Okay, it's the logical interfaces that have to go into the zones. So that's those ones there. Well, those, and specifically I'm using those 3. Those 3 there. So all those layer 2 interfaces are associated or are configured to belong to a particular VLAN. Okay, and it's the VLANs that are in the zones. Okay, well, at that point, any questions about this, by the way, as we're sort of looking at all this? Okay. Okay, well, at that point, we are going to break for lunch, and we will come back after lunch and start looking at security policies. So let's take a lunch break.